Well, hey, y'all. Welcome to the When We Walk podcast, where this is a podcast where we discuss the questions we all ask as we walk through life. Let's chat.
All right. So last episode, we talked about trips.
Yes.
And we just got back from a trip.
We did. A really big one.
Really
we went
big.
to Serbia.
Yes. So first time we have done like a church-related international trip, a.k.a. mission trip. Sure. A.k.a. global journey, as we call them here. First time since 2016 that we've done that together.
Yep.
It's great. Mm-hmm. I haven't been on that long of a flight in a long time.
Yeah, it was pretty long.
Mm-hmm. So I found it interesting that you bought compression socks for us.
Well, everyone told me to.
It just feels like a really old person thing to do. Like, we're at the age now. I have never once in my life thought I need compression socks on a flight.
Yes, I could see that.
Have you? Maybe that's...
Yes, I have, because I have my nursing background that tells you DVTs, like you've got to protect your body from all
DVTs?
all your
varicose veins?
From clots, blood clots.
All right.
Because your blood's pooling for hours. You're sitting for hours.
Yep.
And so
I get the science behind it.
Your body.
Yeah.
And it is true that as you get older, the risk increases. So we had compression socks. I wore mine. You did not.
I did on the way there.
Okay.
The way home.
But also, let's just be honest. No one wants to get off a plane with your big, fat, swollen feet.
That's true.
So it's uncomfortable.
That's true.
To start walking.
Mm-hmm.
So
what will be the next
win.
level is when compression socks are a part of just...
everyday life. I don't know. What age does that happen? I'm not sure. But yes. Yeah. So we had compression socks. But listen, we got off the plane refreshed.
We did.
Ready to go.
My feet were not swollen on the way there. Yep.
Yeah, but Serbia was so great.
It was.
We got to take Laylee with us, our 16-year-old, who that was her first time out of the country. Mm-hmm. And so to watch her see a new culture through her eyes was actually very interesting. Mm-hmm. Because I think you and I had read somewhere that kind of Gen Z in general, because they've grown up with this global connection with social media, that they have more in common with another person in their generation in another country than they do with their own grandparents in their own culture, even if they grow up with them. And we watched that, even with language barriers and maybe even some different little cultural differences, because Serbia is pretty culturally different. Yeah. She and her friend Evelyn, both of them went with us. They just connected right away.
It was easy. Yeah.
It was really cool to watch.
Hanging out with the youth group there. And the interesting thing, so a couple of people have asked me, like, is it safe? Right. And it's like so safe.
It's safer than here.
Yeah. And so they're out till, one night, 10 or 10:30 downtown in the city center at a coffee shop. And we're talking to the other leaders there, like, are they okay? Like, it's Laylee and Evelyn and some,
like, she doesn't know her way around. She can't even speak the language.
Yeah.
Right?
And they're like, oh yeah, they'll be fine. We can go pick them up if you want, or they can just take the city bus home and that'll be fine too. Yeah. Like, that is just a whole different world.
She actually got a completely different experience than we did. Yep. Because she got to see it through the rising generation's eyes and see parts of the city that were different. Maybe we went to more historical, they went to younger, cooler places, and then riding the city bus and going to places that their generation would go to. And she even heard music that they like and things that it was just really neat to see, like, the connection that they can have with other Christian kids of a different culture in a different context. And they just connected. They
meshed. I know, it's really
just
great.
Just like that.
Yeah.
That was really neat.
So that brings the question for today, which is, like, where in the world is God? Right. I think we... kind
of like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego?
Yes, that old show. Yes. Remember that.
And now everyone's singing that in their heads.
Yeah. But the idea of, like, a lot of times we live our lives very insular, kind of in a bubble, in a sense of, this is how God is operating in the world based on what I see, based on what's happening in my community or my nation, based on my church. And when we get outside of our context and begin to see what God is doing around the world, it really does. I think it deepens our understanding
for sure
of God's heart, of who he is, of how he operates. That's one of our reasons for wanting to bring Laylee.
Yeah.
At 16 years old, we've said this with all of our kids, like once they get into that teen age, to try and get them out of the country as soon as possible in a mission context, so that they can see where in the world is God? Like, what else is he doing? How is he operating differently?
Well, and it just helps shape your worldview, I think, in a really healthy way, because like you said, you can get so insular. The funny thing is we are very insular, but we think we're not, right? Because we are so globally connected now. So we can watch news from around the world. We can follow people who are in other countries and listen to their stories. And, on social media, I can literally find anyone in any country and follow them, and
it's a good thought,
and know what's going on in that part of the world, or I think I know what's going on in that part of the world. And we still have to remember that that's just a glimpse. It's just a tiny little, the same way that what I'm putting out on social media is just a sliver of our lives and our context and our story, that's true for everyone else. So we are actually living very insular, but we think
it feels like it.
We think we have this global, this like really good global understanding because we're watching world news, but yet news is still like they pick and choose what we're watching.
Absolutely. It's like your new bubble is not the town you live in. It's not necessarily the church
newspaper you read,
your new
the church
bubble,
you read, the church you go to.
Your new bubble is the algorithm.
Yes.
That feeds you what it knows you want to engage with, and I've actually heard people, this is kind of not related to this topic, but talking about the significance of especially like when we're in election year, where there's things happening globally that we need to be informed about, to kind of reshuffle the deck on your news sources, and find different news sources, just to be able to get a broader perspective.
It's about, and that's what it is. It's all about shaping that perspective. You're getting to see it from someone else's worldview. And I think that's the danger zone of like, we are insular. We think we have a global perspective because we have access to it, but really all it is just, it's still cherry picking. And so for us getting to go actually to another country, enmeshed in their culture, seeing it from multiple generations, because we were hanging out with people who have lived all their lives there, who are, almost 70 years old, to people who are in our phase of life, who traveled more, who've gone and lived in other countries, to now Laylee's generation, and watching them. And it really was completely different than if I were to just follow a Serbian person on social media and hear their thoughts.
Totally. So great example of how different and how broad your thinking can become when you get outside of your context globally is talking to some of the Serbians about how they feel about communism.
Oh, yeah.
Because here, in our context, communism is of the devil.
Right.
And capitalism is of the Lord, in a sense. I mean, that's a level that some people think about it. You go there, and for them, in the time when Serbia was Yugoslavia and it was communist, those were, some would say those were the good days.
Yeah.
They literally refer to them as the good days. Because,
certain generations would say that.
Yeah, because you had everything you needed. You were provided for, there was peace, there was stability. So there were things that now I talked to one of the guys about it, and I was like, help me understand. And his explanation was, there are different versions of communism.
Right.
And the version that we experienced wasn't quite as, at least for a time, it eventually got very corrupt. But early on, it wasn't so corrupt. It actually was benefiting the people until it was not benefiting the people.
But then what we saw over here in the U.S. of communism portrayed in the news, the stories we heard, especially because we didn't even have social media to know in real time what was going on, the stories you would hear are literally the worst stories about communism in Russia and the overtake of certain countries and people groups. And we thought this is the enemy. Yeah. Communism is the enemy. And the way they see it, it's not necessarily.
Yeah.
But man, that was eye-opening.
That was very interesting. And then kind of related to that is like the whole honor shame thing. So,
oh man, that was so big there.
even lately talking about being out late with their friends and her friends all being like, it's so safe. Like, because for instance, you know, if you don't attack a teenager, like that's shameful. Like that's
no.
That brings shame on your name. It brings shame on your families. Like who would do that?
Yeah.
So that this honor shame culture kind of keeps certain things in check.
It does.
It keeps some violence in check, crime in check. I mean,
even homelessness. Did you? We were talking
because you don't stand on the street with a sign.
You don't see anybody. Like Layla even asked that when we were in the car with some of the gals going somewhere shopping or something, and she said, "I just don't see anybody on the sides of the street."
I saw one person.
I didn't see. Oh, I think I saw
one lady holding the sign.
I saw a kid, and that's when someone said, "Oh, yeah, they're probably being, sent to do this." But they said, "Oh, that'd be too shameful."
Yeah.
No one would let their family member.
Yeah.
No one would let their family member represent them on like that.
Yeah.
So they'd rather. I don't know how much better this is. They'd rather keep them hidden in their house. But at least they're cared for. They have a home. They're in their family still. They aren't pushed away. But yeah, that is such a part of the honor shame culture of we don't want that representing who we are out in the world.
Yeah, and so those aspects, I think it was Sveta who said, one of our hosts there, who said, I just love this statement. I'll probably remember it forever. She said, "I have become convinced that we are all slaves to our cultures," meaning our cultures have influenced our thinking
totally
and our operating in a way that we just have to be aware of and recognize it. Just because you're aware of it too doesn't mean it's not true. So the story that Charlotte told, one of the people who was with us, of walking in the house with her shoes off.
Oh yeah.
And they were both like, "It's cold.
You're going to get sick."
Put your socks
You're going to get sick.
And she was like, "It's warm outside." And they both were like, "No." Both of the ladies responded the exact same way. And she just laughed. And because their culture says you don't walk around barefoot or you will get sick.
Yeah.
Or someone who was pregnant saying you don't sit on cold concrete because it will hurt the baby.
Yeah.
So these are just cultural things and those are just kind of silly, but our culture impacts the way, and as followers of Jesus, it impacts the way we see God. It impacts the way we understand the kingdom of God. And what we can do at times, I think, is then assume, because there's something about how God operates and who God is that connects with me culturally, this must be the ultimate truth.
Yep.
And then you get outside of that and you go somewhere else and you realize, actually, there might be more to this. There might be more depth or more layers to how God is operating in the world.
Which is funny because you're saying that, and I'm thinking of how, a teenager grows up in their home, going to their church with their family, and then, they get into their 20s, they go off on their own, and they start asking. It's the same concept. It's worldview. I'm now outside of my internal bubble context, and I get to I'm seeing things in a different way with a different perspective, and I'm starting to ask different questions. And I think it's the same thing when we get outside of our community context, whether it's even just going to another state or part of part of our country, but especially globally. I think that's really important for believers. You get outside of your context, and it really is. It's like scales are removed from your eyes, and you're able to start asking questions differently of God, of what you thought or knew, of simple things like, oh my gosh, they worship so different. I remember thinking that when I went to Africa for the first time, they dance like crazy at church. I mean, everyone is hooting and hollering around the room. Yeah. And you would be the outsider if you just stood there.
Yeah.
If you stood there holding your coffee like we do in America, you'd be everyone would be looking at you, and they'd start pulling you into the dancing. Do you even love Jesus? Yeah. And so it's just good and healthy for us to break down some of those. I think that they can become barriers that hold us back from really even seeing God in his fullness.
Yeah, totally.
When we do that.
Yep. So what are anything you noticed being in Serbia that you would say, this is kind of a different way that God might be operating in that culture than maybe I notice on a regular basis?
Well, one thing is like, okay, so the Orthodox Church, I didn't realize how significant it was in that part, specifically in their country. I think in that part of the world, but specifically in Serbia, the Orthodox Church is it. Like, you are an Orthodox Christian.
It's a part of their national identity.
It's a part of their national identity. So for our context of church to come in there, a Protestant church to come break in, I did not realize how hard it was. I mean, that ground is solid. And to till that soil and to try to put something different in it is like, it feels near impossible. But to see the resolve of our leaders there was, to me, just like a good renewal, even for what we're doing here. Like, they have got it. They've got a hard place. Like, we don't always think Europe is very challenging to bring the gospel. Like, the gospel's already reached Europe, right? Like, it's there. I would say not as much, at least not in Serbia. That fascinated me. But I think the part that gave me the most hope was like the resolve of our leaders and the passion they have to want people to really experience God and see Jesus as a relation, as part of a relationship, and not just a nationality that they have to follow, and they just go to a service and don't even understand what's happening in it.
It's really interesting. In my perspective, it's the most extreme example I've ever seen of how, when religion and nationalism get in bed together, the stronghold that creates in the hearts of people, on a whole nation,
and people.
So they can't even consider a form of church, or you could even say a form of spirituality that is outside of what they grew up in, because it's so deeply rooted into them as, no, this is right.
This is right.
Orthodox church and being a good Serbian.
And then add in, it would be shameful to my family name if I left the church. If I chose this. Like, we hear about that in like the Middle East, or, in China, like how shameful it would be if you chose Christianity. It would be that there. People would get kind of excommunicated from family. They actually think you're in a cult if you're in any other church besides the Orthodox context. They would say it's a cult. And so that was just the fact that our people, specifically Kiki and Sveta, who kind of launched this, initiative to want Lifegate to have campuses there, the resolve that they have to have is pretty strong.
It is. And it helps on so that's the context that they're in, but then you see how the church is operating in that context. And I think it's really inspiring, encouraging, because, we talked about this at Lifegate a few weeks ago, the whole idea of living invitational lives.
Right.
That's the only option they have for advancing the gospel. Like, you can't do social media advertising to get people to come to church. You can't put a good sign up or just have a beautiful building. It's not a culture where people are looking for, hey, where's the closest church to my new home, and where can I get my kids some good kids?
No, people aren't doing that.
No, and so they understand what they have to do is build relationships and live invitationally. And so their English camps and their music camps, they might not have a ton of people on a Sunday morning right now, but they have a ton of kids coming to English camps and music camps that are being exposed to the gospel because they're interested in learning English or learning music,
how to play guitar.
And so, and so it's this really beautiful picture of, I actually think it made me think a lot about imagining how the early church started. Before there was a culture like we have in America where good advertising and good marketing can create a crowd around spiritual things. You have to just live invitationally, person to person, family member to family member, you know, whatever, in your business relationships, at school, whatever it may be. And it's cool to see them just doing that kind of hard but slow and healthy work of just building relationships and introducing to Jesus.
Well, and also the fact that the younger generation is more open.
Yeah, they are.
Specifically there, I think my guess is probably globally, because they are more globally connected and they're more inquisitive. Yeah. They want to know what are these kids into? What is that person listening to? What are they about? And so the people they're reaching are like 20 somethings and younger. Yep. And that's who's interested in coming to church, because they're open. They're more open than their parents' generation, and especially their grandparents' generation, who it would be unheard of to leave the Orthodox Church. But that generation is so much more inquisitive and open there. And I think to me, that was a little bit of a different context of Gen Z than what we hear about them. Of they don't want church, they're jaded by the church,
that's really
they have been hurt too much, they look at the church and what they're doing, all the things that we hear about the way Gen Z feels about church and institution. Yet that's who they're reaching, and they've decided we're just going to go for that generation now, because they're open and they're interested. They're asking the questions because they are looking at other people and willing to do that. So I thought that was interesting too. It
really is interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think it was a great trip. I think it was good for us to just see, not only related to Lifegate and what God is doing there through our partnership, and our campuses there, but it was just good for me to get back out into the world, with that, with that lens on of like, God, how are you operating? What are we missing? Where in the world are you? How are you doing things? And I don't know that we ask that question enough in life.
I think so. I think I remember in college telling one of my girlfriends who she never wanted to go on a mission trip. She just didn't care about leaving the country. And I was like, I think everyone should. And I was so adamant about it. And then she went on a trip and it was hard. And they lost their luggage. It was like everything. She was like, I definitely won't do that again. But I do think we still had great conversation, because there was this wow, getting outside my context opened my eyes of what God's doing globally. And when we remember that, it really does help shape how we minister in our own context. I think it changes how we talk. It changes how we help people see bigger than their small world and maybe problems even. I mean, I'm just a big fan of it. I think every believer, if they have the opportunity to go overseas, to go to even just another context of what God might be doing in another part of the world, I think that is one of the most valuable things.
Yeah, I think so.
That a Christian can have.
Yep. And even if you can't get overseas, you can look in your city and say, hey, where do I not frequent? And how can I go there and serve there on occasion, or find out what God might be doing there? I think it's just a healthy way to live life. I mean, the church, the family of God, is the most diverse group of people, the most diverse spiritual movement in human history. Right. And so we're gonna be spending all of eternity with all types of people.
All types of people.
And so being able to spend life now understanding different types of people and how different churches look and how different churches operate, I think is just I think it broadens and deepens our hearts.
I do too.
And
I think it's significant and important. I remember hearing not long ago that what the places that the church is growing the fastest right now are in Africa, South America. And they have the most Christians in the world, more so. And we look at ourselves in America and we think, we are the church. And when you hear that and then think, okay, I need to think outside my context a little bit, that helps. It just makes God bigger. And you're reminded that he is a big God, and there is so much about him that I don't know. And when I go to another context or culture and see the way they see him, or the way they read scripture, or the way they worship, or the way they talk about God, it will expand your mind, but I think also your heart.
Yeah. So there's this interesting insight from Timothy Keller, and he talks about this idea that the church is the only major world religion. Christianity is the only major world religion whose center of influence or center of power has moved into different places around the globe. So if you think of Hinduism has always really been stayed in India, really.
One area.
Buddhism, Southeast Asia, Islam, the Middle East has the center of power has always been for generations and generations. Christianity started in the Middle East, moved to North Africa, moved to Europe, moved to America, and now has moved to Sub-Saharan Africa, South America.
Yeah.
And his insight there is, the kingdom can find a home anywhere.
Yeah. Gosh, that speaks so much about
but
the gospel.
The other thing is, but once the church gets in bed with money or politics, it usually begins to die. Isn't that interesting? And that's just from a historical perspective of looking at where the church was alive and growing. And then once the church, you could say it, a different way you could say it is, once the church gains power in the culture, not in a position to serve the culture, but in a position to kind of hold power over the culture,
that's dangerous.
that it usually begins to die out and it moves somewhere else. So thinking about now, Sub-Saharan Africa, that is not a place where Christianity is in power politically, but it's growing rapidly. Iran, I mean, everyone's talking about behind the walls there, what's happening. The underground church is exploding. And so that's not to say, as followers of Jesus in America, that we should not engage politically, that we should not try to have influence, that we shouldn't try and impact our nation. That's not to say that at all, but it's an issue of allegiance. Once your allegiance shifts and so that in Serbia, you're seeing, it's got a lot more history than America. You're looking at a nation whose allegiance to really its identity is rooted in nationalism, connected to Eastern Orthodox. And so it's really hard ground.
It is hard.
And we can, I think, learn from the history of these other nations and say how, as American Christians, not only do we go to be able to serve and learn, but how do we also learn from the mistakes of history and say, how do we, as followers of Jesus in America, make sure our allegiance stays committed first and foremost to the gospel, to the things Jesus was most serious about.
And to not go in with, you've got to go in with an open heart, open mind, and ask that question, God, where are you here? Where can I find you? Instead of just like looking for something. I think what sometimes we do is we go in, church should look like this. God should be doing this. Like this is how I know God's moving if I see this, and this. And that is just not true, because that's the beauty of, like you said, the gospel spreading, is it contextualizes in every culture. And I think when we're open and we go in with more curiosity and questions to find God versus I'm looking for him to be a certain way, and if I don't see that, then that's wrong. I think we can either be expanded and enriched by it, or we can, I don't know, our hearts could grow harder.
Yeah. So great trip. We loved it. And for people out there listening, when you're asking the question, where in the world is God? Go find him.
Yeah.
Right?
I think get outside of your context. If you go overseas, take compression socks.
Yes.
For sure.
Wisdom. All right. Thanks so much for joining us. Can't wait to be with you next time.